Welcome to Hangxiety with Lisa T. I'm so glad you are joining me on my morning anti-anxiety routine as I dissect whatever issues or news stories from around the world and in space happen to be inhabiting my brain on that particular day. I'm Lisa Timmons, or Timmons Lisa, depending on how you know me, and I like to listen to soothing elevator music while processing some of the most absurd, terrifying, celebrity-obsessed, full-blown late-stage capitalism, climate change, disaster-based news you can possibly imagine, while also narrating over it in a gently informative, classic radio-style DJ voice because, hey, sometimes you just need to hear it that way. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hangxiety with Lisa T. It is, wow, just what a week. News has felt particularly heavy this week, where discussions of Palestine and Israel have been dominating my thoughts and feelings and social media feed, like those of so many people. And of course, my heart goes out to everyone personally affected by the violence. So, today, the entire episode is exclusively going to be focused on a discussion of this, a discussion of what is currently taking place on the Gaza Strip through the lens of what I personally had to educate myself about in these days since the most recent developments have brought this issue to the forefront of global political news, including here in America, prompting a swift public response from President Biden. Something we've not seen him do during a term that has just been riddled with one national climate and human rights disaster after another. So to start, I am just going to review a series of historical events and facts that took place that eventually brought those Jewish people who survived the European concentration camps after the end of World War II, who were brought to what we know today as the nation-state of Israel. I'm going to start specifically with when the British first obtained Palestine. So, full disclosure, this is a story that I had a vague concept of the start of the Israeli state. Like many Americans, I had watched the movie Exodus starring Paul Newman, and I had read the book as well. So for me, I definitely came from the perspective of the Israeli perspective. So the Israeli and American perspective. So that is why I felt it was important for me to take a look at some dates in history. All right, so in World War I, the British forces capture Palestine from the Ottomans. Then we see the Balfour Declaration in 1917. The British government expresses support for the establishment of a, quote, national home for the Jewish people, end quote, in Palestine. Then we have the British Mandate from 1920 until 1948, where the League of Nations grants Britain control over Palestine, leading to tensions between Jewish and Arab communities. Then there is the UN Partition Plan of 1947. In this, the United Nations proposes a plan to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, which is accepted by Jews but rejected by Arabs. The Declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. David Ben-Gurion declares the establishment of the State of Israel, leading to the Arab-Israeli War. The Armistice Agreements of 1949. Israel signs armistice agreements with neighboring Arab states, shaping the country's borders. So, of course, there have been many resulting conflicts since then as a result of this original Western European interference. However, it lets you know in very broad strokes how the state we know today as Israel was established by the British as a settler colony nation-state, something the indigenous Arab Palestinians never agreed to. I was then prompted to investigate the Balfour Declaration, which appeared to be the first official mention by the British government that Palestine should become a, quote, national home for the Jewish people. I believe this is where the idea originated. It should also be noted that neither England nor the United States were willing to accept these Jewish refugees from Europe as citizens, citing post-war rebuilding efforts as the reason. Here is what I found in my research of the Balfour Declaration. Again, I'm paraphrasing for brevity, but these are some broad strokes of events and historical context. The Balfour Declaration, issued on November 2nd, 1917, was a letter from Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary at the time, to Lord Rothschild, a prominent British Zionist and leader of the British Jewish community. The declaration expressed British support for the establishment of a, quote, national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Here are some details about how it came about and the motivations behind it. So, the Balfour Declaration was issued during World War I, at a time when the British government was actively seeking support from various groups and nations during a global war. It was also in the context of the impending collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which controlled Palestine, and the desire to establish British influence in this region. I cannot overstate the strategic nature of this intention. Zionist lobby. Chaim Weizmann, a prominent Zionist leader and scientist, played a crucial role in advocating for the declaration. He had developed a working relationship with key British officials, including Arthur Balfour. The Zionist movement had gained political influence and had supporters within the British government. Strategic interests. The British government saw the declaration as a way to gain support from Jewish communities both in Russia and the United States, which were influential in these respective countries. They believed that showing support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine would help rally Jewish support for the Allied war effort. There were also religious motivations. Some British politicians and officials were influenced by Christian Zionists' beliefs that held that the return of Jews to the Holy Land was a precondition for the second coming of Christ. Humanitarian considerations. There was sympathy for the plight of Jewish communities, especially in Eastern Europe, who faced discrimination and persecution. The idea of providing them with a homeland was seen as a humanitarian gesture. But again, this is coming from countries who eventually refused to accept the surviving Jewish people as refugees after World War II. Imperial interests. The British government believed that by supporting Jewish settlement in Palestine, they could establish a friendly entity in a strategic location that could serve British imperial interests in the Middle East. It's important to note that the Balfour Declaration was a complex and multifaceted document. While it expressed support for a national home for the Jewish people, it also stated that nothing should be done that would prejudice the civil and religious rights of non-Jewish communities in Palestine. This duality of intent created tension and conflict in the years that followed, as both Jewish and Arab communities claimed rights to the land. The declaration laid the groundwork for many of the conflicts and political issues that continue to shape the region to this day. Black and Latin American solidarity with Palestine. Because it was Black American activist Angela Davis who first awoke my curiosity to the concept of the abolition of a police-controlled nation-state. It was to those Black, Indigenous, and Muslim activists that I turned to see what their take was on the current state of affairs. Of Palestine, Davis says, Black solidarity with Palestine allows us to understand the nature of contemporary racism more deeply. I will include a link to Angela Davis' 2016 book in the show notes. Freedom is a Constant Struggle: Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement. I also came across a tweet from a Black activist who pointed out that it was Palestinians who advised Black Lives Matter protesters how best to deal with being tear-gassed by the police when the Ferguson protests were taking place back in 2014 here in the United States. In an article that originally appeared in the September 29, 1979 issue of The Nation, Black author and poet James Baldwin wrote that, quote, Jews and Palestinians know of broken promises. I'm going to read the excerpt that he wrote, and I quote, But the state of Israel was not created for the salvation of the Jews. It was created for the salvation of the Western interests. This is what is becoming clear. I must say that it was always clear to me. The Palestinians have been paying for the British colonial policy of divide and rule, and for Europe's guilty Christian conscience for more than 30 years. Finally, there is absolutely, repeat, absolutely no hope of establishing peace in what Europe so arrogantly calls the Middle East. How in the world would Europe know, having so dismally failed to find passage to India, without dealing with the Palestinians? The collapse of the Shah of Iran not only revealed the depth of the pious Carter's concern for human rights, it also revealed who supplied oil to Israel, and to whom Israel supplied arms. It happened to be, to spell it out, white South Africa. End of quote. I will be including a link to Baldwin's article in the show notes as well. Additionally, I'm also including a link to an engaging, concise explanation from the late political commentator Michael Jamal Brooks, which is included in a video on Hassan Piker's YouTube channel. So, two major leftist governments in Latin America, Mexico and Colombia, have spoken openly in support of the liberation of Palestine. The Latin American continent is no stranger to Western intervention and its purposeful use of colonialism, racism, and anti-indigenous sentiments to cause cyclical violence and strife among the people there. Terrorist factions break off, often violently overthrowing one corrupt government after another, while the U.S. and its allies step in to rectify the narrative that it is a global peacekeeping force with no other intention than to liberate the oppressed, at least oppression as defined by the corporate-controlled mainstream media, when really its goal is always to uphold and expand white capitalist supremacy by any means necessary. In reading from these scholars on the matter, it becomes very clear to me why so many books by these authors are currently being banned from schools across the country. To put a finer point on this, Ron DeSantis has actually done Joe Biden a favor by helping to restrict books that teach critical race theory, because these teachings are the codec with which it becomes way too easy to understand how capitalist white supremacy functions worldwide in a complicated, tangled web in which the rich continue to get richer and the rest of us keep fighting and dying in their wars. Which brings me to the title of this episode. Holy War Makes for Strange Bedfellows. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, modern-day Zionists and white American evangelical Christians often have a strong political alliance based on shared interests. And this alliance has played a significant role in shaping U.S. policy toward Israel and the broader Middle East. Here are some key reasons for this alignment. Many white American evangelical Christians have deeply rooted religious beliefs that connect the establishment and support of Israel with biblical prophecies and the second coming of Christ. They view the return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land as a prerequisite for the fulfillment of these prophecies. Political influence. White American evangelical Christians make up a large and politically active demographic in the United States. Basically, if you get them on your side, you can have tremendous power in this country. Their votes and financial support have made them influential in U.S. politics, and they often advocate for policies that align with their religious views, including support for Israel. Many white American evangelicals strongly support Israel, viewing it as a key ally in a region where the U.S. has complex geopolitical interests. They often prioritize Israel's security and right to exist. Conservative values. White American evangelicals and many Zionists share conservative social and political values. They may find common ground on issues such as opposition to abortion, LGBTQ+ rights, and a strong stance on national security. Both are prime targets of fear-mongering corporate media outlets like Fox News. Lobbying groups. Pro-Israel lobbying groups in the United States, such as the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, have been successful in cultivating support among both politicians and evangelical leaders, reinforcing the alignment. And now we get to it, the end times theology. Some evangelical beliefs about the end times include the idea that a united Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the Third Temple are significant signs of prophetic fulfillment. This reinforces the white evangelical Christian support for Israeli control of Jerusalem. Disclaimer: it's important to note that while there is a strong political alliance between some segments of the white American evangelical community and Zionists, it does not represent all evangelicals, and there are many other Christians and Americans with differing views on these issues. The alliance is a complex one, driven by a combination of religious, political, and strategic factors, and it continues to shape U.S. policy in the Middle East. However, it appears a decidedly strange and unexpected union upon first glance. The origin of Hamas. In the classic war play we've seen time and again with Western-installed governments in the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa, Hamas actually began as a fringe Islamist group that owes its lasting existence to Israel itself. I'm including a link to the full video of Blowback, How Israel Helped Create Hamas, in the story notes, and I'm going to read the caption below it. It was posted on February 20th, 2018. and I quote, "Did you also know that Hamas, which is an Arabic acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement, would probably not exist today were it not for the Jewish state? That the Israelis helped turn a bunch of fringe Palestinian Islamists in the late 1970s into one of the world's most notorious militant groups? That Hamas is Blowback?" Former Israeli official Brigadier General Itzhak Segev, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza in the early 1980s, told a New York Times reporter that he had helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a, quote, counterweight to the secularists and leftists of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Fatah Party, led by Yasser Arafat. Avner Cohen, a former Israeli religious affairs official who worked in Gaza for more than 2 decades, told the Wall Street Journal in 2009 that Hamas is, quote, Israel's creation. Hamas was the result of this. As Mehdi Hassan explains, first, the Israelis helped build up a militant strain of Palestinian political Islam in the form of Hamas and its Muslim Brotherhood precursors. Then, the Israelis switched tack and tried to bomb, besiege, and blockade it out of existence. That is the end of the quote. This is a classic case of a fringe terrorist group receiving Western-sanctioned government support until suddenly everyone seems to have conveniently forgotten that at one time, the monster that is so gruesomely attacking innocent citizens was once fed by the very government, claiming to want to keep them safe. I would like to share some of my personal experiences and individual perspective on this matter. In sharing stories on Instagram to provide historical context to the situation in Gaza, which resulted in this attack from Hamas, I encountered several angry, emotional followers who messaged me expressing feelings of outrage and grief, and who often were fixated on focusing on specific details of the past few days within a historical vacuum. Their high emotionality is to be understood, given the shock of the violence of the past events this past week and how it has personally affected them and those in their community. It should be noted that they were white, liberal people, some Jewish, some not, who were clearly struggling to reconcile how a campaign of racism and Islamophobia was playing a key role in the dehumanization of the Palestinian people. This campaign was implemented by the Israeli government, along with the British and U.S. government, for decades to control the narrative of justified violence and imprisonment of an entire people, often described as animals. To best understand the lens through which I'm viewing this, I should add that I am a child of the U.S. military-industrial complex. The first time I lived on a U.S. Army base was in Fort Rucker, Alabama, when my father was attending flight school, and I was 5 years old. When I was 8, my father was stationed in Benjamin Franklin Village in Mannheim, Germany, where I lived with my family until I was 17 years old and we returned back to the United States. The time span I spent there was from 1988 until 1997, meaning that I experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of East and West Germany and its initial aftermath, the First Gulf War and the subsequent operations that followed, as well as UN peacekeeping missions in Somalia, all while getting through elementary, middle, and high school. While the circumstances are different, the role of, quote, innocent occupier is one that I have played. In fact, I remember an incident when I was about 11 or 12 years old at a public swimming pool off base in Germany. An older German man heard me speak English to a fellow American Army brat. He became angry and told us that we shouldn't be there. I was completely shocked, as it had not occurred to me that there could ever be a question of whether or not the local people wanted us there. Also, I was white and American. I never faced this type of discrimination, ever. It was alien and uncomfortable for me. However, the incident was by no means traumatic. I found myself more intrigued than anything. I'm actually grateful I had this experience. My initial feelings of shame at being chastised developed into a curiosity to find out why this man felt this way about me. What did I represent to him? At this young age, I had already been to multiple Holocaust museums and had seen all the war movies that lauded the Americans as these heroes flying in on magical B-17s to rescue Europe from itself and liberate everybody that needed liberating. Of course, I eventually dove into the true history of these multinational orchestrations to divide the world up among certain, quote, good nations, all the while using propaganda to maintain the idea that our global movements were not only ideal, but absolutely necessary. In German high school, I was taught world history by German university professors in the Geschwister-Scholl-Gymnasium in Vogelschrang, who explained World War II to me from the point of view of the side who had lost and were bound by international law to acknowledge this fact. As an American, this was a perspective I had never experienced in a school setting. In fact, I remember in my final year of high school in South Georgia in the late 90s having a teacher refer to the American Civil War as the, quote, War of Northern Aggression. I'd also like to add that the public German school I attended for 4 years was named after the teen siblings, Hans and Sophie Scholl, a German brother and sister in a family of German freedom fighters who resisted Nazi ideology and were subsequently publicly executed. My tribe. From my perspective as a member of the global U.S. military tribe, I learned at an early age to pay attention to what the president, my dad's boss, said on the news when discussing issues with other countries, especially those in the Middle East. Because regardless of my family's complete lack of ties to those conflicts on a personal level, I knew that eventually someone from my tribe would be called upon to fight whenever angry fists were being raised here in America. This is why, when the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, I could hear the familiar grind of the war machine being fired up in the statements made by President Bush in the aftermath. At the ripe old age of 21, I knew instantly without a shadow of a doubt that even though the attacks were attributed to the Taliban, a small militant group that did not represent an entire nation of people, that in fact, an entire nation of unrelated people in that area would have to pay the price of American outrage. Any excuse to maintain constant chaos in that region, and, most importantly, American dependence on foreign oil. And then, when Barack Obama announced the death of the head of the Taliban, Osama bin Laden, Americans breathed a sigh of relief, believing that finally, after all these years, the monster under the bed was dead and gone forever. Any concerns that the ends may not have fully justified the decades of bloody means were assuaged in this American victory for democracy for all. And now, with President Biden dealing with approval ratings that resemble those of George W. Bush from just before the 9/11 attacks, I can hear the sound of the war machine gears firing up again. And I know that it means someone in my tribe will likely be paying the price for this new American outrage. I can understand the appeal. After 9/11, President Bush experienced a staggering increase in approval to a whopping 85%, undoubtedly helping him achieve his second term in 2004. With my social media feed flooded with posts about the Gaza Strip, I've noticed that it's overtaken my usual daily stream of climate change protests around the world and hashtag Eat the Rich and hashtag Late Stage Capitalism themed post critical of the uber wealthy who continue to take our money and work us into the ground. Gone are the critical examinations of what exactly this massive Department of Defense budget is being used for, since they keep consistently failing their audits. No longer have I heard any news from DoD whistleblowers sounding the alarm on disturbing implications of advanced technology obtained by entities that operate above our government, questioning exactly what all their missing money is financing. If you were like me this week, you were hit with a lot of historical information and social context in a very short period of time, and you're just doing your best to process it all. My mother, in fact, cautioned me today to make sure that in all of my desire to produce content to help inform and hopefully educate, that I needed to make sure that I put on my own oxygen mask and pace myself. Because this is only the beginning of a radical new understanding of the world in which we are living, and it's going to take a lot of time and energy to build something new in the wreckage of whatever ideologies will be left behind. She also told me, with a laugh, that it was my late father who first introduced her to the topic of Palestine. Apparently, he failed a class in college because he wrote a paper about how there could never be peace in Palestine because of the problematic nature of the formation of the Israeli nation-state. My father, a trailer park white kid in Orlando, Florida, it seems to me, had quite possibly gotten his hands on the kind of books that are now banned there. Sorry, Ron DeSantis. I guess you're too late in this case. So, you guys, that was, for me, a very deep dive. I hope it was helpful. I hope you understand the perspective that I'm coming from, and, that you guys all take care of yourselves. No matter what you're thinking intellectually, emotionally, but this is incredibly difficult for everyone. So please do put on your oxygen mask, take care of yourself, figure out what you got to do to get yourself a good night's sleep, and have a lovely weekend. See you next time.